with my yard.
Wait.
All of you.
Daddy, chill.
What the hell is even that?
You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your hosts, Thomas Ahrens and Jared Mounts. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jigs Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you jacked up, I don't know what will.
Why, hello, everybody. How am I sounding right now? Am I sounding crispy and smooth for everybody? Let me know in the comment sections how your Tuesday's going right now. Thought I'd bring you a little, Tuesday morning live to try to get your spirits up. I know it's halfway through the work week right now, and people are absolutely begging for the weekend to come. Hopefully we'll get some good weather so everyone can go on out and get some tight lines and some memories made. We got 6 people in the queue right now. Yeah. So let me know in the comment section below where you guys are going fishing this weekend or where you guys want to go fishing this weekend. Let me adjust my headphones here. Perfection. Yeah. There we go. Nice. All right. That's looking good. So on today's program, we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of my past tournament, and then we're going to be getting into the top baits for May, just in general baits to throw in May, and then our top baits to be thrown on the Potomac River now. And then we're going to be finishing up with a Swim Jig seminar, something that people want. And don't worry if you missed this live stream, these will be on a replay later in the week, possibly next week as well. So I guess let's just kind of get into her, because I am excited to talk about this. So I had my first tournament 2 weekends ago down at the Chickahominy River, and it was really, really cool. Like, I have not fished the Chickahominy before. I've not fished the James River, actually. And so we got down there on Friday. This was with the Shenandoah Bass Club. And luckily, this was pretty cool. I got to fish it with my wife, which was pretty neat. We had some technical difficulties, things like that, but it was a lot of fun. It was a good experience. I mean, we weren't in it mentally. I was not in it to try to cash a check or win. It was about having fun, getting out there and having some fun. And I think we accomplished that. And she got to really see what tournament bass fishing is actually like, which is pretty cool. But yeah, the one thing I wanted to touch on was kind of like going into a tournament, the things you can do to maximize your success. And it doesn't have to be the necessary way of pre-fishing the way you would think about it. So when we got down there, never been there before, I decided to limit my areas immediately. I didn't have a lot of practice. And if you don't have a lot of practice, I think the thing that can really hurt you is you try to take the whole body of water, whether it's Smith Mountain Lake, Lake Anna, Lake Hartwell, Okeechobee, whatever, and you try to like fish the whole thing. You physically can't do it. And so we picked a smaller area. We picked basically half from really the dam tail race at Chickahominy to about a quarter of the way down. And we said, like, this is just where we're going to be, and we're going to try to figure them out there. And from there, we started to try to develop a pattern, the patterns that we thought would actually play there. There were tons of lily pads stems that were starting to sprout up, tons of docks, and there were cypress trees. Never fished cypress trees before. So that was really cool. And hopefully this is for younger anglers that are actually tournament fishing to kind of take away, is being able to quickly pattern stuff and then find it without having to go there or fish it. So an example is we had docks. Docks docks are a big time thing down there. The problem is they get pounded, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Keep my thoughts straight here. We fished a little bit of docks. We were fishing around, caught a few, but there's 1,000 docks down there. So how do you narrow them down? You can either look at it you can cast a certain parts of the dock and break it down that way, and then you can find the key productive areas. But you also want to look for something different about the docks, especially when you have, let's say, 6,000 docks in a row. What sets them apart? Now, generally speaking, when you're approaching docks, you fish the first one in a row in a segment, a rotation of docks, or once you start fishing them and you catch them, look for observations. So one observation that we made after fishing a couple of docks was we were only catching fish off of docks that had a cypress tree near them. Okay. So now, once we have this clue, what you could do is run around the lake and waste a bunch of fuel. Or you get on your phone, you pull up a mapping software, Google Earth or Apple iPhone, and I want you to then just scan around and look for trees next to docks and drop a pin. Boom. Now what you can do is either transfer that waypoint to your GPS unit, or then you can drive straight to that and mark it either way. But now I've just saved a lot of time. It's a way faster for me to scroll through Google Earth and then double check every single thing that's like that. And then put that onto my GPS unit. Now I don't have to just buzz around all over God's earth. And I eliminated a ton of water. We then took our hypothesis about this pattern and we drove to another dock that had a cypress tree on it. Flipped in there, dunk, we got bit. Cool. We just developed a little bit of a pattern right there. And again, what I want you to take away from this is I didn't have a lot of time to practice. So what I would do is I immediately just started marking stuff. Once I had a breadcrumb for a pattern, I marked a bunch of them on my GPS unit with my phone, and then we stopped, and then I went to the next pattern. The thing with lily pads, and this was something I really wanted to do, was fish the lily pads. There was a billion lily pads, miles and miles of lily pads. I love fishing grass. You guys know that. But grass takes time to break down. And with my wife there and everything, it would have probably taken a full day of practice. Now, if I just spent the whole day fishing lily pads, I probably could have narrowed it down and found the juice, but I didn't want to do that. And that probably cost me. And so the next thing we went to was trying to find cypress trees, key cypress trees that would actually play. Now, again, to do this, we started fishing some cypress trees. We fished different ones. We fished ones that were more linear. They were all kind of unison in how they were laid out on the shore. And what we found out was it was really that first cypress tree to second cypress tree out on a point that always, or generally speaking, had a fish around them. Well, with that in mind, we stopped fishing them. I got my phone out and I started marking a bunch of cypress trees that were around an area that it looked like they were around deep water. Tournament comes there. Not only is our tournament going out that has about 30 to 50 boats in it, but there's two other tournaments in the Chickahominy area that have freaking, I think it was like 60 boats total. So there's almost, I think there's close to 150, 200 boats actually out right in the Chickahominy River. There's a lot of pressure. We get to our first spot. We stick a decent one. She hooks one. And then later in the day, we get our third one. And it was a grind, 100% a grind. I think the best weight out of the three tournaments combined was around 15 pounds. And we're going to actually have him on the show at some point to actually talk about it. And there was boat pressure absolutely everywhere. And so after we got out of our first rotation, it really shut down. Now, I did lose a big one at the boat. That hurt. And then my wife missed a couple. But again, she hasn't been fishing before. So that, what are you going to do there? So we got to the end of the day and we just basically stopped. We threw our fish back and then we started fishing for striper at the dam. Which honestly now I feel like it's really stupid because I thought it was going to take like 25 pounds to freaking win because it's like the James River. And guess what? It didn't. It didn't take very much weight. I think 10th place was like 6 to 8 pounds. So definitely not the best thing to do. But it was a lot of fun. Bait wise that we ended up using to catch them was a shaky head and a drop shot. I use a power shot type of display. And if you guys want to know about my power shot setup, just let me know in the comments below. We can talk about that too. But I knew we were going to be fishing behind people. So there was no point in me. If I feel like I'm fishing behind people or I'm in pressure, I like to go more to a finesse kind of approach away. Cause I think I'm putting the odds in my favor that we're going to actually have success. But just some thoughts there with that. Let's see. We got some comments here. Sunday Mother's Day. We got Zoltan is saying Sunday Mother's Day, not a good day to fish. We'll spend with wife and kids. Correct. But we do have Saturday available, sir. So you could actually get out there on Saturday, get a little done. And helping out at Walton's Saturday. It's a free fishing derby for kids. Dude, that is freaking awesome. That's awesome. Definitely Mother's Day. Definitely spend time with the people in your life that you love and really make sure you take care of them. Because that way, later on, you can go fishing without any issues. So yeah, that's kind of the tournament recap. It was a lot of fun to get down there. Like the James River definitely fishes completely different than the tidal Potomac. Current, it moves a lot more. You can definitely run more milk runs there. And there's not, at least from what I saw, there's not the grass beds. And I think that really changes it too, where you can have really high water or rising water spots and low water spots. And you have that on the Potomac River, but because if you get on a nice grass bed, you can almost fish that grass bed through all the cycles and still have some kind of success. But just some thoughts there with that. No, but let's kind of get into it here. Let's start off with the top 5. So to start with, what we're going to talk about the top 5 baits that I think you should be throwing this time of year in May, wherever you go. And this is kind of a generic list. This is from lakes, rivers, the Potomac River, just smallmouth rivers, ponds, generic. But again, let me know in the comment section what you guys below like. So let's get started here. So number 5 on my list of baits that I think you should be throwing this time of year is a topwater bait, but specifically 2 different types, a popper and a wake bait. Now, a popper is a fantastic bait this time of year, especially with the bass up spawning. They're in shallow water. They're a little finicky, and their strike window is a little bit tighter. They're not going to chase down a bait necessarily. And again, this is all just within reason. So a popper is generally what I'm going to go with first. Color-wise, I like to go with a bone or a black see-through type of color. And I like the river to sea popper just because of this opened mouth that it has there. It really leaves a good bubble trail. Or the Orochi Storm cover pop. This thing is extremely heavy. And what's nice about this is I can flip and pitch it around docks and brush, but then still leave it in the strike zone for a long period of time. This is a bait that you can also throw as the sun gets up higher, and you can actually start casting it into shade lines. The shad starting to spawn too. This is a bait that will still work for that. You can leave it over a fish's bed, really entice them to try to actually bite. The other one that people don't throw anymore, honestly, which is crazy, is like a little wake bait. Now, I know what you're thinking. Tom, you just said you want it to stay in the strike zone for a long time. So why a wake bait? You're crawling this on the surface. That's the key. You're just going to be slowly winding that thing. And all you're doing is you're creating that S-wake on the top of the water column, which is it will get you some of the most devastating strikes possible. And this is something that you can throw around laydown, around docks, around emerging grass vegetation. When the shad starts spawning and you really see some good shad spawns, you can go with that as well, and you can still have success. And again, the one I like, this is just the Uzuri wake bait right here. And with all these, you throw it on a crankbait setup. You can throw braid or monofilament fluorocarbon. I suggest not going to, just because of the sink factor. But that is number 5 on my list. Number 4. So number 4 on my list of things you need to be throwing right now is a fluke. 100%. We're getting into fluke season, boys. Now, the key with this bait is you're going to either nose hook it or you're going to fish it Texas style. Now, I have a whole video about that, actually, about different ways you can actually rig this bait. And I'll list that thing right up here, and you can take a look at that video. But for the most part, I'm going to be nose hooking this thing when I'm around docks and I'm around laydowns. And I'm just going to be fishing it and pitching it around the areas around it to get that good dying, movementing action. And again, what's so nice about this is I can kind of keep it in the strike zone for a long period of time. And with the shad spawn really coming on strong here shortly in Virginia and Maryland, this bait is absolutely lethal. Pair this with 15-pound braid to 10-pound test fluorocarbon on a spinning outfit, and you're going to catch some really good ones. Now, this is kind of where we're going to get into it with number 3, number 2, number 1. And we're going to have a whole seminar on this here shortly. But number 3. So my number 3 bait that you need to be throwing this time of year is a swim jig. Now, I'm not going to get into this a lot because I have a huge swim jig seminar that we're going to be talking about here shortly. But what's nice is like this is the multi-tool in your tackle box. There's so many things you can do with this. I can pitch it, I can flip it, I can swim it, I can mimic a bluegill, a crappie, a shad with it. I can get into the cover, I can fish it slowly. Again, we'll be talking about that shortly. But number 3 on my list is a swim jig. Dirty Jigs makes a good one, but honestly, whatever brand that you like the most will work fine. But definitely give a swim jig a try this time of year. So what do you guys think number 2 and number 1 will be this time of year? So my number 2 bait. Number 2. So my number 2 bait that you need to be throwing this time of year is a tube. So, but I'm not fishing this like a Shenandoah River, Susquehanna River tube. I'm using a Trocar 2-aught flipping style tube hook right here. And this becomes one of the best baits for bass when they're finicky up shallow. They're either spawning, about to spawn, or in that weird finicky, I'm done with spawning, but I'm not going out deep phase. And this is something where if you drag this along the bottom nice and slowly, you're going to get some absolutely vicious strikes. It mimics a shad, it mimics a bluegill, and it mimics a crayfish. It does all three so well. And there's that subtle action that the tube has that nothing else can really duplicate. And no one's really throwing these right now, which is absolutely insane. The other thing that I really love about this right now is its skippability. If you are fishing docks, this right here is one of the best baits ever to be able to skip way back underneath there and get it to where fishes don't really see it. Now, the key with my setup here is I'm not throwing this on a bait caster. If you guys have watched my other videos, I'm a big advocate about power spinning reels and spinning gear. So I actually throw this on a medium heavy inshore redfish rod with 30-pound braid to an 18-pound fluorocarbon leader, and I tie that with an FG knot. That way, when I skip back under that dock, I can absolutely lean on them and yank them out of there. And if I can catch redfish and snook in barnacle-filled docks down in the Carolinas and the Keys, I can handle a 4 or 5 pound bass with that setup there. So again, it's just a power finesse approach, really, since these fish are starting to be spooky and wary of all the angler and boat traffic. So that's number 2 on my list. Now, number 1. My number 1 bait that you need to be throwing this time of year to get success, shaky head. Again, the fish are about to spawn, are spawning, or are done spawning. They're going to be tired. They're going to be wary. And there's also an uptick in boating traffic. And there's also an uptick in just boat traffic on the lake. A jig can still work. But generally speaking, with the amount of tournaments we have on the water we have here, my brain is like, somebody's already throwing a jig at this dock or at this tree. Somebody's already thrown a spinnerbait or a crankbait right through this bed. So when you go back in there and you initially start with that shaky head, that more natural approach, it just freaking, it works. It really does. Some of our better fish at the Chickahominy tournament, I caught on a shaky head, on a power shaky head. So instead of like throwing a big jig or a big pitching bait, going in there with a shaky head was the deal. And we were able to catch fish that no one else was catching. Now, when I throw this thing, I throw more of a power finesse setup. This I'll throw on a bait caster, a medium heavy 7-foot rod with an extra fast tip, and I'll throw it on 16-pound fluorocarbon. And that's kind of my power setup, and I'll just throw it wherever I'd throw a jig. Now, if I really need to get finessey, I will, like around brim beds or when the fish are really finicky, but I usually start out with that power shaky head approach first. So, I mean, guys, that was kind of like my top 5 for May baits. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys actually like to be throwing this time of year. And we're going to switch it up to my next one. Let's answer a few questions here before we get started. James H. Swim Jig is my number 1 lure. 6 cents makes my favorite one because of the head design and the screw lock keeper. Yeah, I love the screw lock keeper on the 6 cents. It's really good. Travis Cyber, I actually caught a few this morning on a tube at Lake Frederick. Got like the tube, so the tube is fantastic for smallmouth and everything, but it's weird. I don't fish a tube enough for smallmouth. I usually fish a Ned rig, but in roll reversal, I started fishing a tube a lot starting like a year ago for largemouth. Cause again, like I can just skip that thing a mile under a dock and I can stay back. I really believe that because of the pressure we put on fish nowadays, that putting distance between you and them, just like if you've ever guys gone to the Florida Keys and you fish like the flats for snook or tarpon or tailing bonefish or redfish, putting distance between you and them is so critical to getting them to bite. And with spinning tackle, you're able to do that. And it always blew my brain where it's like, I could be trying to catch a tarpon on spinning tackle and this thing's going up and down in the air and they don't care. The guides don't care about using spinning tackle. They upscale it appropriately. But bass guys, you tell a bass guy to use a spinning rod uptake, they laugh at you because it's like, it's attacking their masculinity. But it's like, again, if I can catch a massive tarpon on spinning outfit, I think I can catch a 4 or 5 pound bass on it, but I just upscale it accordingly. And then here we go. We got Zoltan, shaky head with a 4-inch trick worm, green pumpkin on Jew bug. Yes, yes, and we're gonna be getting into colors and stuff here in a minute. But basically, the colors I like Black Grape by Zoom. That's a really good one. And then I like green pumpkin. That's about it. And sometimes I'll throw black because of the silhouette. So if the water is stained, I'll throw the June bug, the black grape, or just a black all day. If it's early in the morning, I'm going to start with those 3 colors and segue to a pumpkin. Chris Minder, what would you recommend for the Monocacy River bait wise? I've been throwing a crawl, but it's been rough the past few days trying to learn the river. So I would start with a tube or a Ned rig. I would go with a power Ned rig, and that would be with and actually, do I even have that stuff here? I do not. That's still in the boat. But I would go with a power Ned rig style head, or just a Ned rig in general. Then for a moving bait, I would go with a jerk bait. Jerk bait and some hot colors. Have at least a hot, like chartreuse color jerk bait. Have a white chromish color jerk bait. And then just a pure chrome color jerk bait. Those are the 3 types of jerk baits that I think you should have. Tie those on. Then what's going to end up happening is you're either going to see them because they're going to come up and shark the jerk bait. And if you hook them, great. But if not, you can throw back in there with a Ned rig or a tiny tube and really nail them. Smallmouth are very aggressive. And so you can very easily catch them. But you got to be willing to kind of like adapt and change your baits up. So hopefully that helped a little bit, Chris. But yeah, like start with a jerk bait, different colors, and then segue to like a tiny tube or a Ned rig. And you can kind of go from there with that. That was a really good question, bud. Thank you so much for asking that. So yep, that is the baits that I would say you could generally throw in May and have success with. So now we're going to get into the top 5 baits for the Potomac River. And then we're going to do the Swim Jig seminar and just kind of give you my thoughts on the old Swim Jig. And so this is going to be a crazy list. I think it's going to make some people like shocked. So let's get into it. Get that there. Okay, cool. Number 5. So my number 5 bait that you should be throwing this time of year let me restart that again. So we're in the May time with the Potomac River. Right now, the fish are starting to think about spawning. They're going up onto major grass beds like at the beach, at Belmont Bay, back of Mattawoman, and it can be a really weird time. They're not necessarily going to be biting here shortly, and they're going to be getting locked up on beds, but you can still have fantastic success. So without further ado, number 5. Number 5 on my list is a little bit of an oddball one, but I've had success with it. It's a jerk bait. Now, the key is with throwing a hard plastic jerk bait this time of year on the tidal Potomac is you're throwing it on high tide when you have water above the vegetation, or you're going to be throwing it on the edge of the vegetation. And you're going to go with hot colors. This is a ripstop by Rapala. I like the chartreuse with red, but you can also go with clown if you'd like. You're going to throw this on a little bit heavier line. I prefer throwing it on 15-pound fluorocarbon, or you can throw it on straight braid. That way you can actually rip it out of the grass. But what's so nice about throwing a jerk bait is, first, no one throws it this time of year, and it pauses in their face. The fish, as we get closer and closer to the spawn on the river, they're going to get really finicky. There's going to be a lot of bucks that'll be nipping at the baits. It's going to be hard to get the females. A jerk bait can just pause right in their face and just stick there for a second. And because of the treble hooks, if they swat at it, you can still get them to hook up. Compared to like a swim jig, which I love, and a chatterbait that only have that one hook on it, going with things with treble hooks can really put the odds in your favor this time of year when they're not taking a bait completely. So number 5 again is the jerk bait. Number 4 on my list of baits that you need to be throwing this time of year on the tidal Potomac River. Did you guys really think this wasn't going to make the list? Lipless baits. I mean, come on. Like I am a big fan of lipless baits. Again, it's the ability that I can change the color, I can change the sound, I can change the drop, I can change how hard I work this, and I have treble hooks. So if those fish do not want to commit to the bait, I still have a high probability of actually getting them in the boat. I can make them react hard, and I can find the grass and I can rip it through there. Generically, I would say I want you to start with a 2-tap by Strike King, or you can start with the Booyah one knocker. I have a whole seminar on lipless crankbaits. You can find that in the video description, and I'll also tag it in the in the episode description below. But start with that 2-tap and then go to like a 1-tap. Changing the sound and profile is a big thing that lipless baits do that a chatterbait really can't do. I would really try to give that a try this time of year to really have success. Number 3. Number 3 on baits I think you should be throwing this time of year in the tidal Potomac River. Swim jig again. So yeah, I mean, come on. Now you see where I'm going with this. Why we're doing the swim jig seminar at the end of this thing. Again, the swim jig is starting to get hot on the river now. You can rip it. You can fish it slow. You can switch. You can swim it fast. You can get it into the absolute thickest stuff. It is one of those best baits that it allows you to do so many things that a chatterbait and just a spinnerbait can't do. I would go with a little bit lighter one, but we're going to be getting into that later. And if you're watching this on the replay, go check out my swim jig seminar. It's really going to be good. I hope it is anyway. Number 2. So my number 2 thing that you need to be throwing in the river this time of year, and there's a little bit of crossover here. If you guys didn't know it, yep, we're going back to the old shaky head. So if you are fishing docks, if you're fishing wood, if you're fishing behind 1,000 boats because there's a BFL and then a club tournament and you're just trying to get bit, everyone will be pitching and flipping a Texas rig creature bait, or they're throwing a jig, and you're probably the 50th person to hit that area. You go back there with a shaky head and you're going to clean up. Now, people think shaky head, like I said before, they're thinking like you're going to throw it on 8-pound test to with a 10-pound leader on a little ultralight spinning rod. No. Take out a medium heavy extra fast bait caster, put about 15-pound fluorocarbon on there, and then you can actually pitch and flip this thing just where you do everything else. But it's a subtle approach that's going to get you bit. Especially if this fish are on beds, you can just leave that there on the bed and it will absolutely outperform. Go with a heavier jig head. I would even say like a 3/8 ounce shaky head is not unheard of because you have that weight to really pitch it and flip it back in there. But again, June bug, black grape, or just straight black this time of year is fantastic. And then if the water is super clear, you can go to your regular pumpkin seed colors like that. But that right there is number 2 on my list to throw in the Potomac River this time of year. All right. So what do you guys think the number 1 bait this time of year will be to fish on the Potomac River? Now, like we said, we hinted at before, they're on beds. They're trying to get on beds. The fishing is going to get really tough here. You're going to catch a lot of bucks, but not a lot of big ones. So number 1. So my number 1 bait that you need to be throwing this time of year on the Potomac River is literally a straight-tailed Texas rigged Zoom trick worm. And I would suggest you throw the 4-inch and even cut it down even more. And you're going to peg this with a super light sinker. And this one, I do suggest you throw on a spinning rod outfit. Go with 10 to 14-pound braid main line. And then you're going to tag that with a, I would say between a 10 to 12-pound fluorocarbon leader. This is what you're going to be doing with this, is you're going to be dragging it slowly through the grass beds on the edges, through those spawning areas. Because a lot of these fish, when you fish tidal river, you're not seeing the beds. It's not like fishing Lake Frederick or Lake Anna where you can actually get visual eyes on it. It does happen every now and then, but for the most part, you're blind casting bedding areas. So going with this smaller profile when everyone else is throwing a stick bait with a little sinker on the end of it, or a 7-inch sink bait, a 5-inch Senko, something like that. When you go through there with that super small trick worm, it's going to fool those bigger females into biting. And plus the tail has a lot smaller tag end here from here to the shank of the hook. So if they grab to push it off the bed and you're getting short striked, what I suggest to do is cut off some of the bait and then shorten up the tail section to make it even smaller. That way, when they do bite, you're able to actually get them in. But those are my top 5 baits that you need to be throwing on the Potomac River this time of year. What do you guys think about it? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you think I missed something out of there? Comment below. Let me know what you guys think about that. And I'll be answering your questions, and then we're going into the swim jig portion of this thing. Alrighty, guys. James H. right here. Because bass live in such heavy cover and are aggressive enough to eat heavy tackle presentations, bass fishermen use way heavier line than saltwater guys for similar sized fish, and baitcasters handle. Yeah, like I yes and no. So James H, I kind of see your point. I grew up going every year to Florida, to the Florida Keys, and I've been fishing saltwater down there since I was like 8. And what my thoughts are is not the fact of the bait caster, and I think this is maybe we're saying the same thing here. I've caught tuna on spinning tackle. I've caught tarpon on spinning tackle. I've caught sharks on heavy spinning tackle. And so I think if you compare and contrast, the biggest difference, there's 2 big differences, I think, between spinning tackle and between bait casters. One is for the bait caster, it's the winching power. It's your ability to really crank on them. It's a lot easier, I think, and people believe this, to be able to crank on a fish with bait casting tackle. The number 2 reason is you're able to thumb it and stop it. And that is, I think, the biggest perk of a bait caster is the fact that you can be way more precise with your casts than you can with spinning gear. When you cast that thing out, you can put your thumb on it and stop it very easily, which I think is very important. The other thing is pressure, I think, too, and versus a reaction bite. Saltwater fish, generally speaking, let's say with the flats and stuff, you have got to bomb cast that thing. I mean, absolutely bomb cast that thing to get separation between you and the fish. And you can't do that with a bait caster. And so if you want casting distance, period, in the story, I can outfish you with a spinning rig than I can a bait caster, period. And so let's say if you're fishing blueback herring, spoiler here, I'm going to give some juice away. I can beat your butt with a spinning rod. And I have a medium heavy saltwater spinning tackle setup. It's a 7.5 foot rod with a massive saltwater spinning reel. And I can tie either a whopper plopper, or I can tie a walking bait on that thing, and I can literally cast it 5 football fields. So no matter, literally, I'm not going to exaggerate a little bit, but I could probably cast from one end of Lake Anna to the other, like across a creek arm with that. So wherever they're blowing up, I can hit them. And because I have that heavy setup, I can pull the hook and lock into them very easily. Now, the same thing, like if I'm pitching and flipping, let's say pads and stuff, I do want a bait caster set up because I can quickly feel that and know where they are. If I'm pitching in there, I need immediate to be able to quickly set the hook. That is where I think that bait caster setup is very important. But there are so many instances where it's like, why don't you use a spinning rod in this situation? It makes sense, especially if you're trying to get a bait back there. And I know like people are like, well, just skip with a bait caster. I could, and I'm saying you can't, but wouldn't you be more efficient with a spinning rod setup? And you just go with that heavier stuff, and you can still winch them out of the cover. So I don't know. It's just a philosophy. It's some good thoughts there. Let's see. John Brian Rice, would you group a Ned rig with a shaky head? That's a very good question, John. Yes and no. I think it comes down to profile. It really comes down to profile, I think. So example is, now, let me rephrase that. I am blessed with the Fishing the DMV podcast. I get to interview and talk to some really cool people. And talking to Chris Gorsuch and Kingfisher Guide Service and Shallow Water Adventures, and they run off the Susquehanna, the Shenandoah River, and the Upper Potomac. I don't think the shaky head is necessarily in the same category as the Ned rig. I think the tube and the Ned rig are in the same category. And so I think the difference is the profile. If the fish are feeding on Mad Toms, which is a tile of little catfish, and I always say, you guys all at home, Google Mad Tom catfish, Potomac River, Shenandoah River, something like that. It looks just like a tube. It's a thicker body profile. I think when they're keying in on little catfish or bigger crayfish, I think the tube plays. I think if they want a smaller style, a more thinner profile, I think that's when the Ned rig really plays. Now, with that said, I think the biggest shaky head killer, what it really helps I pair with, is a jig. Wherever you would throw a jig is where you can throw a shaky head. It's more of the finesse approach of that. And because of this head attached to the hook shank like this, you get really good feel through your line of what that bait is doing. So I basically fish it just like a jig. Flip it out there. I can just move the line, shake the line like you would a jig, and it's going to make that bait work. Now, so I hopefully that answers your question. And so I would honestly think like I would go a jig, a shaky head, then a tube or a Ned rig if we're going down the spectrum of finessiness, if that makes sense to you. But I mean, that's my thoughts on it. Good question, John. I think we're saying the same thing about baitcaster first. Yeah, I thought we were too. But it's just interesting because like there are a lot of times, and again, like two of the tournaments I won, I was doing things the same way but different, and it's because of spinning tackle. And it's crazy when you think, like, look at all the Japanese anglers that are kicking butt right now. Look at all the California anglers. Look at how them master spinning gear, and they throw it different ways. So I don't know. It's just some food for thought there. James H. Spinning has better casting distance, line capacity, drag performance for hard running fish. Baitcasters have better cast accuracy, more compact, lightweight reels for thicker lines, better winching power. 100%. I think 100% better winching power. But again, it's like it depends on what you're doing. And what I mean by that is if I am punching mats in Florida where there's a lot of crap above my line in the fish, I think that's when the winching power plays. That's when the winching power completely excels. If I'm pulling a bass out from underneath a dock, I don't think the winching power has a much of an effect there. If I'm punching straight into the middle of a tree, I think the winching power plays. If I'm casting around the edges of the tree, I don't think the winch. So I think it depends on when I think the winching power it really matters. But again, I think the biggest thing is your casting distance, period, end of story. You bump up to super heavy casting gear. Again, topwater fishing, and we're going to be doing this. If you guys really want to make a whopper plopper work for you, get yourself a saltwater spinning rod, get yourself a saltwater spinning reel, put 30-pound braid on that thing, throw a whopper plopper. You will throw that damn thing 10,000 feet. And what's crazy, you're going to catch more fish than everyone else because they bite on the very end of the cast. Because the thing that makes them bite is that you're not around them. Fish get so pressured now, and our lakes get so beat to hell. The thing that's going to separate you from everyone else is getting you as far away from them as possible. And that's what casting gear can do. And so even though it feels weird, like, I don't want to throw a crankbait on spinning gear. I don't want to throw a topwater. Yeah, but if you got an extra like 200 feet between you and the fish, you're going to catch way more. It's the same thing with fishing grass beds, especially in the Potomac River. If you have 6,000 boats, the farther you can put between you and the fish, the more calm he's going to be and the more prone to biting he'll be. And that's what going that heavier spinning gear allows you to do is you can bomb cast and you have heavier enough equipment to deal with those stronger fish. And again, it's very niche, but it's something that people don't do, and I don't know why. And I think and that's what I think a lot of these Japanese anglers are showing us, that only throw spinning gear. And I know for a fact a couple of them do bump up the tackle because they're used to fishing only 2 lakes in their country because that's all they have, and there's 6 billion people fishing them, and so you have to outthink the room. So I hope that kind of helps you there. And then if you guys got any more questions, let me know. We're gonna get to the last part of our segment here, which is going to be swim jig fishing. And then we'll be taking your questions, and then we're going to be wrapping it up so I can get some homework done because I have final exams coming up. Alrighty. Get all my swim jigs around here. The ones I want to talk about. I don't know why that's there. That's a spinnerbait. That's not the right place. All right, where am I at? All right, guys. The main hors d'oeuvre, the thing that I think you guys been waiting for, and this is the thing that you guys voted on actually in my poll. And again, I try to do a poll at least a week on the comment section or the community section on my YouTube page. So always go to there and then let me know other videos you'd like me to see. And then one last thing before we get started, huge shout out. Thank you guys so much. The last fishing video I did went viral on YouTube, and it was actually pushed by the YouTube algorithm for recommendations. And that was my Hidden Gem series. If you guys don't know, once a month, I try to do this fishing series called Hidden Gems. And the whole purpose of that is for me to highlight different bodies of water that are really cool that no one knows about. And so try to look for those videos the best you can. So, dude, you're making me, James H., you're making me want to take an 11-inch striper plug rod to a bass tournament. Dude, there's certain situations where it makes sense. Like if you see a tree, and hypothetically here, if you see a tree at the back of a pocket and you're entering the pocket and it's about 100 yards away from you, you want to fish that tree, right? Why not just make the cast? Just make the cast to the tree. Why you get so close to the tree? You can see it. Well, the reason you do that is either one, I think people don't think about that, or two, you can't make it with a bait caster. Guess what? Put a Cinco on a medium heavy saltwater rod with a big ass reel and pod launch that thing to the tree. You're going to be shocked at how many more bites you get because those bigger fish can feel the trolling motor. They can feel the boat. They can feel all the electronics. And so having that big surf rod, so to speak, and you pod launching that let's say stick bait to that tree, all of a sudden you will get bit more because that fish doesn't see you, doesn't feel you in the water. But then you get that big ass boat moving up there. And I think a lot of those bigger fish they dip away. And you can tell that when you watch like a lot of live scope stuff. But anyway, good question there, James H. So we are going to get into it here. I'm super excited about this. Okay, this is not basic stuff. We're going swim jig fishing down the rabbit hole. This is where my mind's at. As you can tell from some of the hardware here, this is one of the ways that I've really made a killing in college. And I won some decent money fishing some semi-pro tournaments. So let's just get into it. So swim jig fishing. Get my notes here. So why a swim jig? Kind of really getting into the weeds of it. A swim jig can go pretty much anywhere. They have the ability with this weed guard to be fished where no other bait can actually be fished. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. And so what we're going to get into is why fish a swim jig, how to pick the right swim jig, along with deep down, like what is the swim jig trying to represent? And when you talk about a swim jig, you have to talk about two things first, which is primary action versus secondary action. And this is something that if you really want a super deep dive, you would really go watch Matt Allen, Tactical Bassing. He goes into better depth than I could ever do with this. But basically with a swim jig, as you reel it back in, the primary action is going to be the trailer's movement. The secondary action is what the skirt does. And a spinnerbait does this extremely well. The plume of the skirt, the unbalancing, the wobbleness of it. And a chatterbait and a spinnerbait can do that very well, depending on how you work it. But the secondary action of a swim jig is kind of what makes it absolutely just so freaking deadly. And this is the Swiss Army knife of the fishing world, period, end of story. You can throw this as a swim jig, or you can throw this pitching and flipping. And that's something we're going to get into now when we differentiate the application in which you're using it. What is the primary function of the jig you're throwing? And we're going to get into that into a minute. But then what is a swim jig? Honestly, what are you trying to represent here? Well, I think what makes a swim jig so cool is it is probably the number one bait that you can throw that mimics a bluegill, a crappie, and then maybe a little bit of a shad. But I think primarily this is the number one bait for throwing if you're trying to mimic a bluegill or a crappie. And we're going to get into that in a minute here. So we're going to get into the two functions. And the two functions I think is primary versus secondary. And I'll get into that. Is the primary function of the jig you're throwing to be pitching and flipping? Or is the secondary function of it pitching and flipping? So an example is I have a slew of docks going down the bank. When I'm picking my jig, I'm first asking myself, am I just going to be hitting all of the docks? Or am I just going to be swimming it? And this is very important because it kind of gets into the head. Now, this is a Dirty Jigs jig, but you can see that narrow-shaped head, and that gives it its ability to pierce through the cover. But the other jig I like to really throw, and it's also as a swim jig, is this one right here. This is an Arcane style head or a casting jig head. Now, why, Tom? Why are you doing that? Because if I'm throwing this, My primary motive is to be pitching and flipping it. I'm casting it to wood and cover. However, I'm not going with a straight flipping head. This one kind of cuts in between a swim jig and a pitching head. So if I'm on a good dock bite, I'm going to go with this one here. But the difference is the trailer I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with a swimming trailer, generally speaking, a rage crawl or a creature bait. That way I can still mimic a crayfish, but when I'm going in between docks, when I'm going in between laydowns, I can still slow roll that thing and pick up extra bites. Too many times I see people, they're either flipping a jig or they're swimming a jig. And what you need to ask yourself is, what is my primary function? If my primary function is flipping, fine, but then tailor something, the trailer and the head, so you can still have a secondary function with that bait, which is you can swim it. On the same token, if my primary function is swimming it, I'm still going to go with this, but the difference is I might change up the color. I might go with a bluegill color and a chunk trailer. That way I can still pitch it and flip it every now and then. So that's the first part. The second part will be, what type of response are you trying to generate from a fish? And there's two types of responses, I believe, in my opinion. You have a core reaction response and you have a core feeding response that you can generate with a swim jig that you can't generate with anything else. So the number one, the core reaction response, that's the same thing a jerk bait does, rip cranking does, where that bait pounds in there, and the quickness in which that bait leaves or hits cover makes that fish react. It doesn't necessarily want to feed. It's just reacting to something in its space. And when you're trying to generate a core reaction spot, and I think this is what generally everyone does when they fish a swim jig, is they try to fish a core reactive response. You're going to go with a heavier jig. Now, I suggest what you're going to go with is you're going to go with a 1/2 ounce. And if you want to go light with this, you're probably going to a 3/8 ounce. That's about it on the light side. But it's usually going to be a 1/2 ounce or greater. And you're going to be pairing that up with either a swim jig, or swim jig, no kidding, a swim bait or a rage crawl type trailer. But the problem is, the heavier this jig gets, the more the back of the bait is going to be stabilized and it's not going to be off keel. And this is, again, something that Matt Allen's even talked about before. You need a bigger trailer to get that thing to move. Or if you have to go with a compact profile, you're going to have to jiggle the rod to actually get that bait to bounce and plume. And then that's how you kind of get the core reaction response when throwing a swim jig in general. But I don't think that's the best one. I think the best one that no one does is a core feeding response. Do you guys remember what I said this looks like at home? It's a bluegill. This is the #1 bluegill and crappie imitation on the planet. How many times have you guys gone to a pond and seen how a bluegill reacts? How does a bluegill move? It's slow. It's methodical. It stops. It pauses. It doesn't fear bass. And I think this was something that really clued me in when I started fishing big swim baits. If you're mimicking a shad is a pelagic species. It constantly moves and is in constant fear of getting eaten by everything. And so generating a core feed response is different for a shad. It's usually a reaction bite, in my opinion. That bait is white, it has a bright color, it flashes, and the bass like, I gotta go get that thing because it's a shad. A bluegill, generally speaking, they're not afraid of bass. Go to any aquarium, go to a pond. You can see bluegill and bass and crappie interacting with each other, and they're very calm. They're very relaxed. They're not fearing them. And when you throw a swim jig and you go with a heavier head, the reaction response is what's going to be occurred by them. Because two things: when you throw it heavier, you have got to reel it faster to the relative water depth to keep it moving. So the speed is already going to be up. Number two, when you hit cover, the heavier the bait is, when you make contact with stuff, the harder of an impact you're going to have. So whether it's a tree, it's grass, it's a dock, if you throw a ounce swim jig, you're going to hit that cover harder. And when you pop it free, it's going to jolt 12 inches. It's going to really move out of that kill zone, which is fine if you're trying to mimic a shad or trying to get a reaction spike, but you're not going to get a feed response. When you want to get a core feeding response out of the fish and you want to mimic a true bluegill, you need to go down to a 1/4 to 5/16 ounce swim jig. And then what you want to do is you want to pair it with the thickest trailer you can get. Okay. I want to do a thicker rage crawl, or I'm going to go with this massively buoyant swim bait, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get that bait as neutral weighted as possible, to the point that when I'm over top of grass or anything, I can damn near slow roll it like you would a swim bait in the wintertime. And that thing just stay in the strike zone as long as possible. Because when you ever see a bluegill or a bass that's trying to actually eat a bluegill, this bait is going along absolutely slowly, and a bass is going to shark it. They're going to shark it the whole time. When I hit something with this lighter bait, I can gently pop it off. And again, if you've ever watched a bluegill in the wild or in their habitat, when they're around a tree or some grass, all they do is they roll a little bit and they keep on doing what they want, and they pause. They don't usually hit a piece of cover and dart 100 feet. With this lighter bait, when I make contact with cover, it's not going to be ripped away 12 inches. It'll hit and it'll slowly move off. And when I make contact and I finally pop free of it, it's going to pause because it weighs so little. And that's really what you're trying to go with this lighter bait, is I can just slowly roll that above or right on top of the vegetation. So I'm just barely ticking it, or I'm just barely ticking the wood. And when I give it a little jolt with the rod tip, a light one, that thing is going to hover there and plume for a second. And that bass that's just watching that thing the whole time and sharking it, when it flails like that, it's not moving too far out of the way. It's just staying right in his face, and they're going to inhale it. And so generally speaking, the biggest fish I've ever caught on a swim jig, when I'm fishing a pure swim jig style, doesn't come with the super heavy ones. It comes with the super light ones. And I can fish this in absolutely gin clear water with tons of pressure because no one's doing it. And so really to wrap up that section of the swim jigs, don't think of it like a typical swim jig. Think about it like you're trying to throw a swim bait in the wintertime, and you're making contact and you're just crawling it around the cover. And you're picturing that largemouth is just sharking it, because generally speaking, bluegill don't get too freaked out about bass. They're not going to jolt away. But when it makes contact with something and just has that little bit of glance, boom, they're going to eat it. And that's the same reason why I pick the colors I do. Generally speaking, when I throw a swim jig, there are two colors. I'm going to go with the dirty jigs, bluegill or yellow perch, or I'm going to go with some kind of white. Now, you might be thinking, Tom, well, I thought you just said it mimics panfish. Why would you go with white? Exactly. Crappie. What are the two major spawns that happen around the bass spawn? Do you guys know? The first fish to spawn is the crappie. And I used to fish lakes all the time that only had bluegill in it. And I would fish white all the time. And I didn't know, like, why the hell are they biting white? It doesn't make any sense to me. And then one day when I was crappie fishing, I stuck a monster bass. And it hit me. We are always told that bass go to wood in early spring in staging areas. Is it because they're staging, or is it because that's where the crappie spawn? Does that make you think? So maybe what's happening is the white is not just for shad, but that white really helps with mimicking a crappie. And that's why I think going with a little bit of white and then pairing that with like a rage tail crawl or your favorite swim bait, you're able to mimic kind of a shad, but you're also mimicking a crappie. And then when you want to go full bluegill, you can get that bluegill imitating color, go with a rage tail crawl or your favorite swim bait, and then you can dye the tips yellow. And one other last big tip. If I am fishing bigger baits, a bigger profile like this, okay, for bigger fish, and I'm getting short strike, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the rage crawl. I'm going to cut the skirt back, and I'm going to get those flappers as close as possible to the jig to help me with those sure strikes. Because a lot of times when you're fishing the feed response version of this and you're slow rolling it, they come back and they inhale it or they nip. And if they nip, I'm going to cut it down a little bit shorter. So, I mean, that's it with the swim jigs. The way I like to fish it, I like to fish on 18-pound test fluorocarbon. Generally speaking, that's what I like to do. And I use a Phoenix rod specifically, but you can use whatever rod you want. And you can go with, I like to go with a heavy action, extra fast tip, 18-pound fluorocarbon. Because again, when I do this, I really, really like to pitch and flip it. And I feel like when you swim a jig or you pitch a jig, no one ever does like the opposite. It's like I have to pitch a dock or I have to swim it. I do both. And that's why I kind of like to go with 18-pound fluorocarbon. Is like, if I end up, I was casting a grass line and I see a tree and I cast it over the tree, I can still set the hook and kind of get them with that. So guys, I really hope that kind of helps you out. If you guys have any questions down below, I'm going to answer your questions real quick. And then I'm going to go get some lunch and start on my homework. Let's see, James H. A 14-ounce swim jig with Yamamoto Cowboy is my go-to. The trailer has some bulk to the body and the legs have massive flipping surface. There is absolutely floats with that combo. Yeah. And again, maybe I should have said this in the video. It's all relative too. So you want to be able to slowly roll that thing and just tick whatever you're trying to do. Lightly touch it, not bang it. So if you think about it, you're trying to lightly touch it without making a noise. And so how it was explained to me is if you have a drum set and you have the big metal disc that you can hit, if you're throwing it a heavy jig, that's like taking the drumstick and smacking that thing really hard. And you're alerting everything in an area that you're there. If the feed response version, you're taking and you're trying to touch that thing. I think it's a tambourine. I don't know what the hell's on a drum set, but that big metal thing. What you're trying to do is trying to touch that thing without it making noise. You're just trying to gently touch it. And that's, I think, the visual that you need is no matter what size you want, you need it to be able to slowly float around the cover and gently touch it without making too much commotion because you're sneaking it past like a bluegill would. So I hope that helps. And then we got, let's see, one more question here. What are your favorite trailers? So favorite trailers wise and favorite jigs. So favorite trailer wise, Kitech. That's a really good one in general speaking. This is a brand. I got to go find the box. I'll go find the box and I'll link it in the episode description below when I redo this. But this is a very thick ribbed swim bait here. And while I can cut it down, but again, you see how much bulk this bait has and you see how limp it is. And if you compare it, this one is way more limp in it, and it's going to have a lot deeper thud back and forth. Now, it is a little bit bigger bait, and that's also because this head is a lot heavier. This is a 3-ounce head, and so I need it bigger to get that roll. And the other thing, again, is just like I freaking love a rage crawl. It really works well. It's got really good flapping motion. The other one I like, and I've had really good success with this one, is the Strike Zone Ledge Buster. Again, this is kind of like, this is my crappie shad color. And then I'll change, depending on the water clarity, I'll change this out with a silver one. And again, what's nice about this, and I do this, I will, when I'm fishing the shad spawn or I'm up shallow and I'm fishing willow grass, things like that, I get the little bit of flash, but I can still pitch and flip this thing. And again, that's why I really do love throwing an archaic style head or a swim jig head, is you'd be like, well, Tom, this thing looks stupid as hell. Like, how would you, it's not perfect to flip and pitch. You're right. It's not perfect to flip and pitch, but I can still flip and pitch it. And so I could either set my rod down, pick up another one to make 2 casts, set it down, or what I could do is take this rod with one bait and I can hit everything at one time without a problem. So that's just kind of like my thoughts on that. Let me know down in the comment section below what your guys' thoughts are. I'm going to answer all your guys' questions and then we'll be getting going here. Let's ask that one. Let's go with this one here. Going to give that shot today. Thanks, man. Yep, that's Chris Minder. Yep, absolutely, sir. Would you group a Ned with a shaky head? I already answered that question there. Let's see, James H. Already answered that question. All right, Nathan Cross. I always tell myself that I'm going to throw a swim jig more, but when I get on the water, it never feels like the right time or situation, so I never do. I obviously need to get over that. Nathan, the best way I'd suggest is just pick up a jig, get an archaic style head or a casting jig head, and then just take that and then put a swim bait or a rage crawl on the back of it, or even a brush hog. That works too. Like when I first started fishing, I just used a brush hog. And that way, when you get around a tree or something, you can pitch it and then just start casting it down the bank. Again, I think go with a lighter one and start visualizing that's more like a swim bait, maybe, instead of a jig. Because if you're trying to throw an ounce, it's fine in circumstances and you're getting that reaction bite, but you can't slow roll it. And a lot of times that slow rolling where you can bump bottom is fantastic with the swim jig, is when you're bumping the bottom. If I didn't want to bump the bottom, I would just throw a jerk bait. I would just throw a top water. But wherever you throw a jerk bait, you got to ask yourself, why am I throwing this here? Or is there something better to throw? If I don't want to touch bottom or anything because I'm in shallow water, I'll throw a top water bait or a fluke. But if my job is trying to hit something, whether it's hard or soft, then I need to match the weight so I can do that efficiently. So that's a good question. Good question, dude. Let's see here. I think that's everything. I got any more questions? Nope. I think that's everything. All right, guys. Sweet. Well, I really appreciate everybody here. I got no more questions. So I have a podcast episode that just dropped today. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. We got more videos coming out this week, and we have another podcast episode actually coming out on Thursday as well. So tight lines, be safe out on the water, and I'll see you guys next time on Fishing the DMV. Bye, guys.